image of the profession is something that we all inherited from the generation before us. When I was studying for my bar finals in 1989, I went to a reception and I noticed on the guest list there was a member of the Supreme Court. So I went up to him and I introduced myself. And I was dressed in a sari because it was an Indian event, and I'm used to wearing traditional clothes. And he said to me, "And which part of India do you come from?" Perfectly politely, of course, but he just made the assumption that I was on a holiday from India. And I said to him, "I come from Scotland, and I'm studying for the bar exams, and I'm hoping to apply to your old set of chambers for training, pupillage." And he visibly took a step back. His wife, who was delightful, took my hand and said to me, "Oh, good luck, dear, good luck." Well, in fact, a few months later, I did pass the bar exams, and in fact, I did go to his old set of chambers for my pupillage, which is our first year of training at the bar. And although they were a set that were then virtually all white, there was one female there whose father was a professor at Oxbridge, they treated me really well. But in that moment, when I was at the reception, I could have decided that the profession was not for me. But of course, we're talking about what the situation was. This is about 30 years ago. And there has been a tremendous amount of change since then. We all have an eye on what our profession looks like. Whether we properly represent the communities that we serve, and whether or not we can take steps to ensure that while maintaining merit, we can achieve more to make our professions more visibly diverse, but also a diversity of the types of backgrounds that people come from. There are no lawyers in my family. My father came from India in the 1950s to the UK for economic reasons and supported his family back in India all his working life. But yet, although I had no connection with the profession, just because I stuck around and wasn't put off by comments that were made to me, that was one, there were many over the years. The profession was one in which I was able to enjoy a career and now enjoy a position on the bench. Geoffrey Voss, the Master of the Rolls, head of Civil Justice, and a former ENCJ president, spoke in October 2022 about reshaping legal service. He mentioned 3 areas. The first one was diversity. He said, how do we make people from different backgrounds more comfortable and feel more included? We all know that there is really no simple answer to that. And yet we're all trying to find it. How do we get people into the profession? How do we encourage them to do that? And once they're in, what do we do to make sure that the environment is such that they can progress? We in the UK have been looking at this issue for a number of years now. And we have quite an established group of judges who go into schools, speak to school children, explain what we do, and bring school children and university students from a range of backgrounds into our courtrooms so that we can show them what we do, how we do it, and make sure that our courts and our legal system is not alien to them, that the first time that they come in contact with a judge isn't the first time that they appear in a courtroom, if they ever get there as an advocate, but to make them comfortable and made to feel welcome. The other thing that we do is we encourage people who require or would like to have a mentor or a judge that they can speak to or a practitioner that they can speak to have that facility. And so that we are now targeting people very early on to make sure they know what we do, how we do it, and they can then decide whether it's something they would like to pursue. One of the points made by the previous speaker was that one of the difficulties for the legal profession is that law isn't taught as a subject in schools, and so it's more difficult to engage. But I have found, many of my colleagues have found, that schools welcome speakers from the legal profession, whether that's to young school children, just so that they know what courts do, or whether it's people who are considering applying to university. Access, familiarity, knowledge of how the system works, makes a huge difference. And we're seeing that in the numbers that come into the profession. One of our issues, and it's the same issue that we saw in the slides that were presented earlier that applies to women, is retention. Once people come into the profession, how do we keep them? And how do we support them? And personally, I think that's a more difficult issue. And that's where we all have to be more mindful of the language that we use and the discussions that we have. I can remember as a junior barrister, the discussions over wine, normally, were about holidays to France, wine, and skiing trips. None of which I had done, because when we had holidays, we would either go and visit family in India or family in South Africa. But I think that over the years, we have now begun to consider everyone in the room and what sort of topics we discuss. And if we haven't, we ought to be aware of it. The other issue is simply social mobility. Many of my colleagues, female colleagues, couldn't proceed and continue with their professions at the bar because they had children and the childcare responsibilities were predominantly with women. And so they just found that the working environment wasn't such that they could combine both. I also have children, but I had them a little later, and by the time I had my children, I've got 3, I was established in my set of chambers. And so I was able to say to the solicitors who were sending me work that I wouldn't travel more than 15 minutes from my home. But not everyone's in that position. And so a lot more needs to be done to consider, how do we retain good women? How do we retain people from backgrounds where they can't afford to pay for very expensive childcare? And that's the way in which we will be able to make sure that going forward, going up into the senior levels of the profession, we have more diversity of not just the types we can see, not just race and gender, but also of background. I'm going to speak to you now, if I may, about judicial appointments, because I'm involved in judicial appointments. And one of the things that we're really interested in the UK is how do we make sure that our judiciary, our judges, also reflect society. And we believe that a more diverse judiciary is a better judiciary. The more views there are around a table of judges, then we can serve our public better. And we're very interested in making sure that our rule of law, the way in which we're perceived and the way in which we deliver judgments and deliver justice is outstanding, because that is, we think, one of the hallmarks of a proper functioning society. So the slides, please. So the race to the bench, just an overview of our judicial appointments. Can I have the next slide? Oh, sorry, I meant to do that myself. Okay, I failed at the first hurdle. Right. The first thing that we do is we advertise the judicial appointments that are coming up. And that may seem an obvious point, but before, we didn't do that. And people didn't know when they were meant to apply for jobs. So now it's all available on the Judicial Appointments Commission website. The second thing that we do is we make the process, the application process, clear for everyone to understand and to prepare for. It always involves some form of self-assessment, whether that's a CV or some bullet points which the candidate has to give evidence about. The second thing that we always have are some independent assessments. Not your friends who'll say, this is a really good man and he would make an excellent judge, but people who will actually speak about your work, what you've done, and what the outcome has been of your work. Eligibility. How long do you need to be qualified? What else do you need to make sure that you are eligible to apply for the appointment? There's no point, is there, having applications that people have spent a long time putting together to just find that they fall down on the first hurdle. Shortlisting. For some judicial posts, we get thousands of applicants, in particular for the part-time fee-paid judge roles. And so we always need a way in which we can narrow it down and decide who goes through to the next stage. And then there is a selection day, when there will be an interview so that the candidate can be asked about what they've put in their form, but also why they think they're suitable for the role. And sometimes there's also a test that's included, some sort of scenario, we call it, where you say, this is the situation in court, what would you do about it? And then after that, there are statutory consultations, and that is when we ask people more senior in the judiciary for their views about a candidate. And the very last two, character. We want to appoint judges of good character, and then following that, the recommendation comes to our board to consider. And we look at all of the information available to us when we make that decision. Okay. This is their current position. In relation to our diverse candidates, recommendations for the legal roles are broadly in line with the numbers in the pool of eligible lawyers. Our problem at the moment is the pool of lawyers. So in 2019-20, 25% of applicants fell into that category. 14% were shortlisted, 12% recommended for appointment. So in terms of how we're doing from the eligible pool, rather well, in line with what you'd expect. As I said, our issue is, at the moment, the pool of judges, the pool of applicants that we've got. The area that causes most controversy, and the one which we're all trying to get right, but there are really no easy answers to this, is fair selection. Because what might appear fair to me might not appear fair to somebody else. But our aim is to select fairly. And we are very keen to get this right. So, we have one of the commissioners that is assigned to look at all of the positions and what happens in each part of the exercise. But the part that we're really interested in at the moment and focusing on is our targeted outreach. We are actively going out and speaking to candidates who are concerned about how they're going to apply and what they need, and helping them through the process. And then what we do with that group is we monitor their progress through the exercise. So even if they're not appointed that time as judges, we can go back and we can help them and advise them on what they need to do to be better prepared next time. The other part that we've brought in most exercises now is name-blind shortlisting. And that means that there can't be any unconscious bias when looking at an application form. That, I think, is really important. And the exercises that I'm involved in at the moment, and I'm involved in looking over the circuit judges, so that's all the trial judges' appointments, and also our part-time recorder appointments. Those are my two exercises at the moment. And I've been looking at the names of the details of the people who've applying, and I can't work out who they are. So everyone's given a number, and that's the way the shortlisting is done. We also make use, more and more, of our equal merit provision. And that means that if we have two candidates, or more often, who have exactly the same score at the end of the exercise, we will appoint the person who is in the group that is least represented within that part of the judiciary. And often, not always, but often, that means the female candidates, although we're doing better with appointing more women. And often then, it's protected characteristics, whether that be diversity of background, which school people went to, or whether it be their race, or whether it is their religion as well. So we look at the stats of the judges in that area, and then we work out what are our targeted groups. And our aim is that where we can, we appoint on merit, because that is the criteria for appointment, but we also improve the diversity of the judiciary. This is what we're doing to address our challenges. The targeted outreach programme. We have the Judicial Diversity Forum, and we get help from them to look at how we're going about our appointment of judges. We have a pre-application judicial education programme headed up by a very senior member of the Court of Appeal to try and expose potential applicants to what it's like to be part of the judiciary, what experience they need, what we're looking for. And we have ethnically diverse selection panels. More often than not, our panels now include at least one member of the selection panel that is diverse, and our number, and there are a whole range of them, of projects that we're involved in. Throughout the profession in the UK, we regard diversity, as the Master of the Rolls did, as one of the key challenges. We want to make sure that our profession retains the merit that it has enjoyed thus far, but we also want to make sure that we represent the society which we serve.